What's going on, Dominators? Rico Garcia here. I hope you're buckled in, ready to rock and roll with us with another amazing episode. Today, we're going to be joined by Mike Fulton. Let me tell you, this guy's got so much information. He's got so much history within our restoration arena, and we're going to be talking about a lot of things that I think are so relevant in today's age of restoration and where we are in the restoration arena. We're going to be talking about not only company culture, but we're also going to be talking about leveraging technology and leveraging the appropriate mindset in order for you to grow your restoration business. Definitely one of my favorite interviews that we've done to date. Again, I hope that you enjoy. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Let's go.
Welcome to the Restoration Domination Podcast, where you learn actionable advice that moves the needle and helps service-based businesses dominate. Here's your host, Rico Garcia Jr.
All right, Dominators, what's going on? Rico Garcia here, bringing you yet another amazing episode. Mike, welcome to the show. Are you ready to help us dominate?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Awesome, man. Cool. So do me a favor, fill in for the few people out there in the restoration arena that may not be familiar with the name or familiar with what you've done in the industry. Can you just give us a quick little intro and fill in some of the gaps on my intros to let everybody know who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So Mike Fulton, those that know me in the industry know that I'm a contractor by heart. That's what I still do, although much less on the side now, just primarily due to age. But my background is in practical application of estimatics tools, software, and even more importantly, repair cost data itself. I've been in the industry for 40 plus years, have been on the technology side for the last 30. So exclusively on the technology side, my main history has been with an organization called Xactware, now called Property Estimating Solutions within the Verisk organization. And that's what I do. So my role today is more of just an independent advocate for the restoration industry, talking to folks that are on both sides of the aisle, those that are buyers and sellers, educating, helping people to understand and trying to improve the industry as it is today.
That's amazing.
Recently retired from my position at Xactware Verisk as of February 2023.
Oh, congratulations on the retirement. Congratulations is in order, right?
Congratulations. Well, yeah. I would like to tell you there are some distinct benefits to being in charge of your own schedule.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Put it that way.
So let me ask you this, and I think that this is an immediate great segue into some of the things that we want to talk about today, because of your current role as an advocate to really inform people about the industry. I'd like to start off with asking, what do you think is the one, if there is one of the biggest questions that, contractors in our space need to be getting right, that the one thing that they really need to be asking if they're looking to be successful? What would you say that is?
I would boil it down to two things. Actually, one of the questions I would ask you would be similar to that, Rico. But from my perspective, and again, I'm a cost guy. That's where I spent a lot of my time. But the questions people need to be asking within their own organization are, number one, what is my cost to perform a given unit of work down to the nth detail? And then what are my competitors charging? And I think there are many, and I want to be cautious in saying many because many doesn't mean most. There are quite a few that do understand those things, but there are many that don't. And I think that's one of the key things that people have to understand to start with. Otherwise, if you're going to be relying on some sort of technology, some sort of data provider to provide you with those things, then and you're not going to know whether you've got enough money left in the bank until you see how many checks are left in your checkbook at the end of the month. You're going to be in trouble.
How would if right now, if you were to go ahead and if you were speaking to someone who's considering jumping into the industry, right? Or they're in their first year of being in the restoration arena, they're still trying to get their sea legs together. What would you recommend? Like, how would you coach them and be like, hey, look, this is how you're going to break down what your costs are. These are the major metrics that you should look at. And more importantly, you may not be able to contact your competitors right away. So this is how you can kind of make an assessment of what the rest of the marketplace in your general area, what they're charging. How does someone collect that data ethically?
That's a key question, a great question. And frankly, my assumption has always been that someone is getting into this very specialized niche of the construction industry. I call it a niche within the construction industry, not unlike I did. I mean, I started, out of high school, out of college, and this was back in the late 70s, early 80s, and going into the 90s. I was doing everything. I was doing the gamut between new construction, remodeling, and restoration work. And those that have been around since that time know that it was not uncommon for people to cross over and do all of those things. So I had a very good idea of what my costs are. I didn't realize until, the restoration industry has changed significantly since then. It's a different animal because the level of customer service, which is directly related to the people that you're going to employ, providing uniforms to your people, your estimators. Every one of your estimator ideally should be riding around in a truck that you're washing on a regular basis. Uniforms clean. They should all have a shop vac in the back of their truck to be ready to take care of any issues that the policyholder sees when they get out, and if they're doing both estimating and project management. But you've got to understand what your costs are. And some of these tools that are available in the market today, which you may be compelled to use, Xactimate is one, CoreLogic's tool is another, are going to provide you with data that gives you a starting point. And that should ideally give you some sense of what that market is charging out there. But you've got to build yourself into a point, and the good ones, the big franchise organizations, the big yellows, the big greens that are doing this. They literally do productivity studies on their folks, and they know how much time it takes to do a thing. But knowing how much time it takes your guy to install baseboard per linear foot is one slice of it. If I'm going into a new construction environment, I can do that exponentially faster than I can do it in a restoration environment, because I can set up my saw and my sawhorses and everything and my compressor right inside the house. I don't have to set them up in the driveway. I don't have to come inside and measure, go back outside and cut and watch when I'm coming in and out of the door and wiping my feet and not letting the dog out of the house and all of those things. If the house is occupied, those things can add 40 to 50% to your costs just at a minimum. But that's so key question that you've asked. And I don't know if I've given a right answer. It does come with some level of history in just understanding the business, knowing what costs are to do a thing in each one of these different niches. Remodeling is a little bit closer to restoration work than new construction, but it's still a completely different animal.
Right. So where would be like some good starting points, right? Because again, and we're talking about, maybe for the experienced veteran who maybe was, 10, 15 years at a restoration company, project management. He's kind of gone through each one of the rungs of what the restoration arena may look like. Maybe they're coming into the business with a totally different mindset, right? They're probably worked at a bigger type of, restoration company. A lot of this data was already provided for them. They have like this initial gut instinct from training, but that's a very different person from what I feel is entering the marketplace today, which are a lot of people that are just, starting water mitigation for the first time, right? They never really worked anywhere else. They're starting their own company. It's a totally different animal for them to try to get their own feelers for what something should cost. So is there some, in your opinion, some metric or something that they could do today that says, okay, this is what I have to watch really, really closely in order for me to create my own database of facts, like how much time I'm spending on this, how much I'm paying for XYZ service. And then from there, build in all of my costs and kind of create a baseline for what I should actually be charging for projects.
Yeah, understand. Just like in any business where you usually underestimate the amount of money you need to spend on marketing,
Yes.
right? When you're going into that business, you're going to be spending money on marketing. Although if you get involved in some of the direct repair programs and the TPA programs and so on, that's supposed to take care of the marketing aspect for you. You don't have to go out and bid 3 jobs in order to get one. But training is key. If you're coming into this, either coming into the restoration environment from the remodeling environment, from the new construction environment, or just starting this off and saying, hey, I want to start up a business. I've heard this restoration thing is cool. You really need to put yourself through some good estimator training. Number one, you need to know construction from the ground up. So from the footings to the ridge cap, you need to understand that. You need to understand mitigation. You should be checking into an IICRC school and taking some certified water restorer programs. There are plenty of schools out there. There are a couple of keys where they will literally take you out and they'll have a home out on the back lot, a constructed home that they'll flood, and you'll dry out during that week's course. And then they'll flood it again for the next class. Those are just highly recommended. And those folks that do that and specialize do that day in, day out, will not only teach you the processes, they'll help you understand the equipment that you're going to need. They'll help you understand the costs that are going to be involved. Everything from drying, lifting and drying to things in place versus doing the, the total demolition that historically. Training, I think, is key, and people need to be able to put forth the money to do that, not just for them, not just for the principal, and the principal's got to do it. The principal of the organization has got to do it, but your estimators have got to be able to, and your folks that are in the field need to as well.
Yeah. So I usually don't like to put my guests on the spot in the sense of making any kind of recommendations, but I will say from some of the places that I've gone to, and again, this is totally non-sponsored, no horse in the race whatsoever, but Reach Drawing Academy, in my opinion, is one of the top institutions. Big shout out to Jeremy Reitz, that really does everything from beginning to end. And I feel that people walk away from their training with a real, true, genuine understanding of what it is that they're doing from a technical perspective, right? Like, hey, you need this fan,
Sure.
you need this DU, and the measurements for that and the formulas for that. But the way that they connect the dots between that, perfunctory aspect of the duty, and then what that translates into an invoice with their Xactimate training and their negotiation training, they're, in my opinion, they're definitely one of the top tiers. Would you happen to have any additional recommendations for someone who's listening? Do you have any preferred training institutions that someone should take a look at?
So, from a general estimating perspective, that's one of the things that, and I'm not trying to plug anybody in particular. Xactware created a very nice construction estimating training that you can get online with their estimator training, and you can sign up for that, and you can have all your people sign up for it as well. But there are some drying schools that I've been familiar with. Some of our people that have been familiar with. I've gone to the IICRC course, which is pretty much just an educational type of course.
Awesome, cool. So one of the things that you had mentioned on the onboarding form, I send an onboarding form kind of to each one of my guests, just to kind of, so we have some initial talking points and to see if there's anything interesting that kind of pops up to me. And usually one of these questions is, what do you wish that more business owners knew? And you said to really recognize technology as another tool in the arsenal and to model your business around it. Break that down for me a little bit more. I know that we touched on it, but I feel like there's more for us to peel back there.
I think that's one of the things that people struggle with. As a contractor, it was a game changer for me when I bought my first cordless screwdriver. And this is going back to like 1979, I think, and it was a Makita. I was a Makita guy back then, and I think it was like 7 volts, but it was a game changer for me. But you can bet, when the 12 volt came out, and when the 14 volt came out, and the 18 volt came out, I was buying them. Same with compressors, right. Same with pneumatic nailers and all of those types of things. People often don't look at technology, meaning estimating tools, computer systems, the ability to communicate and collaborate with people in a digital world, as something that's a tool that they should focus on. They look at it as a cost to their company, but they often look at it as something that they can live without. And right. People often think within the industry, what's my cost of deploying this tool? What's my cost of deploying Xactimate? What's my cost of deploying CoreLogic? When in reality, they ought to be flipping that around and say, what's my cost of not deploying that? Same way with, you make a decision when you're starting in a business. Do I want to buy, I've got to have 5 trucks to start up my restoration business. Am I going to buy some that are 5 years old that have got 150,000 miles on them? Or am I going to go lease new trucks? And right. You got to make that conscious decision to say, there's a reason that some of these trucks that are 5 years old and have 150,000 miles on them are out in the marketplace for sale, because the level of maintenance that's going to be required on there and the time that they're going to be in the shop, overcomes that which I would be paying for a lease. And I think that's what's key with regard to technology. So not just this thing that everybody has in their pocket, the iPhone or the Android phone, but the software that's on it and what's it going to enable you to do. The things that we're seeing technology-wise with remote measurements, object recognition,
amazing,
ability
right?
to measure a roof from an aerial image, and the ability to detect the material that's on that roof. It's incredible. And what you're going to start seeing even further along those lines is the ability for those applications to audit your estimates for consistency. And this is a big thing, even on the restorer's side. Am I including everything in that estimate that I should be including? Mm-hmm. Or am I including things that I shouldn't be including? And it's not just the simple thing like if I estimated to paint 150 square feet of ceiling on a 12 by 12 room, which ought to have 144 square feet on the ceiling. But, am I including all of the additional things? Have I thought about all of those additional things? And so you're going to see those audit tools come into place within those applications. And that's starting to happen today. But
Yes.
if you think about the future beyond that, once, auditing an estimate for accuracy, there's not a great leap between that and writing the estimate for you to begin with based
Right.
upon some imagery. And
Right.
that's what people are seeing. And you're going to want to see restorers who are going to want to fall back on that which they do best, which is actually making the home right?
Yep.
Getting the policyholder back in their home on time and on budget and so on.
And it's funny that you mentioned that because obviously you're not privy to this, but one of the sponsors of our show is Actionable Insights, and they have the Actionable Profile,
Yep.
and that is an amazing piece of software that, again, does a lot of what you're just speaking about now. Maybe
Yep.
that's what you were referring to, maybe it wasn't, but I've gotten amazing feedback from other restoration contractors and how even public adjusters that are using this, and we're like, man, I didn't realize how much stuff I was leaving out of the estimate, or
Absolutely.
or how we were kind of double dipping in the eyes of an estimate because we had this one line item that contradicted another. So this technology, the way that it's evolving, I think that there's a lot of apprehension when it comes down to a new rollout or a new offering from, regardless of where it comes from. But if you just spend a little bit of time, it's how much money can that make you? How much time can it buy you back? And that's where I think it's really interesting to see the direction that technology is going. But what I've noticed quite a bit, and I'd love your feedback on this, is why is it that the restoration arena, our industry, why does it seem to be so apprehensive about adopting new technology, things that is going to make their jobs a little bit easier? Why, have you noticed that? And if so, why do you think that apprehension, where that apprehension comes from?
Well, I think, in general, and this is from my own perspective, you've got a lot of people that are very good at customer service. They're very good at practical application of performing repairs and getting people back into their homes on time. And doing it right and working with the policyholder, because once you've given a bid for a restoration job for the claim itself, and you got that claim settlement, it all becomes a remodeling job at that point, because often what the policyholder wants to go back with is not what they actually had in the home before it was damaged. But I think it seems the reluctancy is, it feels like there's a level of control being placed upon you, some of these software tools and the data that's being used. And there's a massive history around that we could get into at length. And I think what we've got to do as an industry is we've got to have a more effective level of communication and education. And I'm not just talking with restorers, I'm talking with the adjuster community, with the insurer community as well, to understand what goes into the cost of a thing and why it's important for somebody to be able to charge what's appropriate for their particular organization, for that particular policyholder, and for that particular home.
I love that, man. So what do you think, as far as a restoration contractor looking at the arena the way that it is today? There's a lot of debate about using tools like, let's say, like Xactimate, right? There's other segments that are looking more at stability for whatever reason, and then there's this entirely different camp which is just saying, hey, use your own pricing, don't use any of the software. There's zero benefits to that. What's your take on that? Do you think that it's the operator's inability to communicate and articulate what they see and what they're doing through those pieces of software, and they feel that they need to do their own thing? Or do you think that it is legitimately a barrier for some people to use tools like Xactimate and the like?
Well, it could be a barrier. I think that from what I've seen, and I agree with you, I applaud organizations like Actionable Insights and their Xactimate Ninjas group, which is just really focused on education amongst people and helping people to understand. It's amazing the lack of general construction knowledge that you see out there from people that are trying to get into this industry, and just knowing what a particular thing is and how to price out a particular thing. And they've, in some ways, some of these software tools have actually, forgive me for lack of a better word, have kind of dumbed down the industry a little bit. People rely on that crutch a little bit too much. Right. But you can't rely on cruise control all the time. People have to understand that. But I think the reluctance is related to the technology and the feel that there are restrictions, that there are controls that are being put upon people that they don't necessarily need. I frankly agree. I think we're in a state today in the industry, and I could tell you how we got there, of where insurers will, for lack of a better term, and this isn't the best term, incent you to use the price that's being published within one of these soft, rather than using your own pricing. Mm-hmm. You can either, it's like the old analogy, you can either get on that train, you can get out of the way, or you can get run over by it. And there's a way that you can leverage it. And if you understand the application, understand the tool, Actionable Insights is great with regard to the audits that we talked about in that particular profile, telling you what you're potentially missing out. But I guarantee you, if you're not doing well leveraging one of those tools, you're not doing something right in the way that you're estimating, because and I'm not talking about cutting corners. I'm not talking about adding things that shouldn't be there, but you've got to understand everything that's included in those line items so that you can appropriately select each one.
I love it. And you mentioned that there's a history to this approach, and also that there's a way for you to leverage what's going on. Let's dig into that, because I think that a lot of people, I think if we just leave that out in the ether, people are going to be like, wait a second. How can we actually leverage this? But before we do that, let's just take a quick moment to thank our sponsor. Dominators, let's face it, your company will make it or break it on the backs of your estimating team. But if we're honest here for a second, what tools have you actually given them to succeed? The Actionable Profile is the newest tool inside of your estimator's toolbox, or at the very least, it should be. The Actionable Xactimate Profile is a data-driven solution that provides real-time estimating guidance on the fly. It checks for both overages, omissions in your estimates in real time, leading your team to having much more accurate scopes each and every single time that they're writing an estimate. Avoid any kind of potential conflicts with the adjuster and ensure that your estimates include every single warranted line item with the Actionable Xactimate Profile. Get your free demo today. If you head on over to value.getinsights.org/dominate, we've got an amazing offer for you. Again, head on over to value.getinsights.org/dominate and get your free demo today. If you're a restoration contractor who is tired of chasing money on property insurance claims, then you have to check out Inc. Inc. is a digital payment network that helps restoration professionals get paid more efficiently after an insured property loss. And by using promo code DOMINATE at signup, you can get an amazing 50% off the one-time signup fee on IncPay. And after that, IncPay is free to use. So go ahead and join the hundreds of contractors that are already using IncPay to endorse, deposit, and disperse insurance claims check. And best of all of this can be done right from your mobile device. So head on over to inc.com, that's IINK.com, and use promo code DOMINATE. Hey, Dominator, did you know that it takes about 45 days for most contractors to get paid on emergency service jobs? And some contractors report much longer wait times than that. Either way, it's a long time, especially when you start adding in all of the stress that you have to do to keep up with payroll, overhead costs, and everything that goes along with just running a business. Well, One Claim Solutions is an insurance billing specialist that not only gets their clients paid in 32 days on average, but it also improves their profitability, and above and beyond that, it also handles all of the communications with the adjusters. One Claim Solutions was actually founded back in 2016, and since then, they've been able to process hundreds of millions of dollars in insurance invoices on behalf of their clients. Listen, you deserve to work with a specialist that has well-trained attorneys as well as staff, and also they have proprietary purpose-built technology with some really rigorous time-proven processes that's needed to deliver a best-in-class insurance billing experience. One Claim Solutions will handle it all so that you can focus on really what matters most, which is running your business. Head on over to oneclaimsolution.com/dominate. Again, that's oneclaimsolution.com/dominate. Book your free consultation today. Hey, Dominators, did you know that about 80% of businesses are actually unsellable? This is why you need to let Restoration Brokers of America work with you to ensure that you maximize the value of your business when you decide that it's time for a change. All you have to do is visit sellmyrestorationbusiness.com for more information. You've worked hard to build it. Now let RBA work hard to sell it. Hey, Dominators, quick question. Are you looking to attract top industry talent? Well, I'm here to tell you that Wylander is the go-to recruiting company in order to attract the best talent available inside of the restoration arena, period. Now, why do I say that? Well, simple. With over 1,000 placements, and more importantly, with experience in all 50 states, as well as in good old Canada, Wylander is going to be able to find the right fit for you and your company. Wylander not only has the expertise, but more importantly, they already have the connections to make sure that they find that perfect fit for you and your organization. So listen, we all know that time is money. So stop wasting time just sifting through resume after resume and let Wylander do the heavy lifting for you. Get back to what it is that you're good at. Get back to money-making activities. Call Wylander today. Let them help you find that next superstar in your organization. All right. And we are back. So we had left off with, we're going to go ahead and get into a little bit of a history lesson. And we're also going to be talking about how we can leverage these systems. So take it away. Let's just jump right into that because that seems really exciting for me.
Okay, so I've got to caution myself because I can get into a long, drawn-out explanation of this. But from a history perspective, especially if you're somebody that's coming into the industry today and you want to get into the restoration industry and you approach an insurance carrier and you say, I want to start doing property repair work for you. And the very first thing that they say is you need to go acquire one of these estimating tools. Mm-hmm. The typical person is going to think, okay, why are you wanting me to acquire one of those tools? Is there something going on? There's some kind of relationship there that I don't have control with. And it looks like it might be providing some additional controls on me. When I started at Xactware, this goes back to 1992. I came from the construction industry. I covered the gamut from restoration to remodeling to new construction. A lot of people at that point in time were doing a lot of crossover work. Not necessarily the case now. It's obviously become a lot more specialized. Anyway, Xactware was formed in 1986. So I joined the company about 6 years after it had been in existence. And at that time, the founder of the company realized that while local repair costs were generally known by the players in each one of the markets, whether it's and that includes both restorers and adjusters, there was a need for common general repair costs to be published at kind of a prevailing rate, either for those that were relatively new or for costs that might not be commonly used. I mean, you might know what the top 25 costs are in your particular market off the top of your head, but the other 500 that you might need, you might not have. So what the founders of Xactware did at that time is they discussed how do I capture and publish prevailing rates for material and labor in each market. And what they did was they created a precursor to what is today's price list. So if you were to license Xactimate back in the late 80s, you would have gotten with your price list a list of item codes with descriptions that you're familiar with. Every one of them had 0 for the price. They were all 0. Didn't matter if you were in Columbus, Ohio, Miami Beach, LA, whatever, they all had 0. And what you did as an estimator, what the estimator did is they'd access an item like dry 1/2, FNCB, et cetera, and they'd add their own local price, what price they knew it was at that particular time and place for that thing. And if you're going back to the late 80s, you could get drywall done for 60, 70 cents a square foot back in the day. You'd add that into your estimate. The application would say, hey, do you want to save that to your price list? And you'd give it the okay. That way you could use that price in the next room. You could use it in the next estimate, et cetera. And then what Xactimate would do is they would send out a diskette on a quarterly basis. And this is back in the day, 5 1/4 floppy disks and eventually converted to the 3.5-inch discs.
Some people are listening to this right now saying, what is a floppy disk?
Right. Yeah, right. Who needs it? But anyway, I mean, you'd plug that, an estimator would plug that into their machine. It would go and capture all of this. They'd run an option within the application called feedback, and it would capture information from the estimates that they've written. They'd know what items they've used, what prices they've used, the quantities they've used, the locations which they've used them, left out any kind of personally identifiable information, et cetera. Customer would pull that out, drop it into a prepaid envelope, send it back to Xactware. Xactware would start gathering data and aggregating it all. And that's key. So the key things to understand about that was 1986. While Xactware was founded in 1986, it was actually circa 1989 before they began publishing price lists that actually had prices. Mm-hmm. So they were using that 3-year period to start aggregating all of that data. The other key point at that time was, this is back in the day, we always say back in the day, is that an adjuster would go out and write an estimate. They'd hand that estimate to the policyholder and they'd say, go get 3 competitive bids, or go get a competitive bid, 1, 2, 3, whatever. And what you generally got was several contractors who were writing scopes on those estimates in addition to the adjuster. So what Xactware was getting for feedback back in that day was obvious, sometimes 2 to 3 estimates per scope from the contractor's perspective versus 1 adjuster's scope. So you can see how that aggregation worked. And it worked really well for publishing prevailing rates. And there was a lot of flexibility in the industry that was allowed from a pricing perspective. It was assumed that prices differed among homes, locations, among restorers. Then, in the mid 90s, with the advent of the internet, came the direct repair programs, and with them came the managed repair programs, headed by what we call, TPAs, valuable service, to be sure, ensuring consistency in estimating practices, making sure that all the contractors in the network are licensed, insured, bonded, background checks, all of those types. But the other key thing that the industry evolved into, and that's because we as a society evolved into a very litigious society. And I'll give you here's the prime example, Rico. Let's say you and I own homes on the same street, and they're identical homes built by the same builder in the same year. And the roofs on our homes were destroyed by the same storm on the same day. And oddly enough, we both are insured by the same insurance company for property insurance. Back in the day, you'd find a roofer to replace your roof for, let's say, 15 grand. I'd find one to replace my roof for 12 grand. We both get paid. Our roofers get paid, our roofs are replaced, everybody's happy. And that's, that's as per your homeowner's policy language. Your homeowner's policy language says, we will pay to repair or replace your thing that's damaged. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say we guarantee we'll pay you this much for the thing that's being damaged. Although I can see things coming that direction at some point in the future, but everyone's happy. And then let's say Mike and Rico get to talking a couple of weeks later. I find out you got 15 grand for your roof, for the same roof, and I only got 12. So guess what? I lawyer up, I go after my insurance company, and I try and collect the other 3 grand. Mm-hmm. And ultimately they end up paying it because it's cost to them to actually try and, litigate these teams. That became common enough that insurers decided that one of the best ways they could limit their exposure is to have not just consistency in how claims are settled, but in the values at which they're settled. So that kind of led towards this. It's better for us to just make sure that we're paying Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Jones the same amount per square of shingles or per square foot of drywall that we would be, and it's done in the same place. And that just led to that widespread use, which, use the prices as they're published by the software, or more appropriately, the data provider as they're provided, which had, obviously an impact on the feedback process that I mentioned earlier, the type of data that's been being returned to some of these organizations, which in turn created a tremendous need for greater real-time communication between these data providers and the restoration industry so that they can get real-time data with regard to what costs are happening in the field. And we also evolved because of that. We evolved because of those lockdown and people were doing those things and relying on these products, these software tools as kind of a crutch. It just led to people not really understanding what their costs are. They just rely on the software to do it, and they don't understand whether they're losing money until they get to the end of the month or the end of the year. And if there's any 2 points to be made, it's like I said earlier, you've got to understand what your costs are, and you've got to understand what your competitors are charging, and then what's going to be appropriate for you to be selling a service. And again, like I said earlier, it doesn't matter to me whether you're selling hamburgers or you're selling restoration services. But that's how we got into this state of this common repair prevailing rate cost. And the question is that how do we modify, how do we evolve this industry back into a state where people can realistically have some competitive forces that are going to be applied in the market? How do you realistically, in that type of a world, how does Rico compete with Mike for restoration services if we can only charge the same thing for the same level of work?
Right.
I mean, you can compete by again, buying new trucks, putting nice logos on them, washing them once a week, giving uniforms to your people, customer service. You're paying your people more per hour than I'm paying my people, which just means that your costs go up, but your revenue your margins go down because you're correct. You're just not making enough. How do we evolve that and how do we get back? That is the key. And I think we've got to have we've got to understand that intersection between quality of work and cost for the work. People have to understand this and get away from this misnomer of what's called the right price. What is the right price for a thing? The right price is what I'm willing to do the work for and what you're willing to pay, obviously. And that can be different.
And I want to kind of put a pin in that because I definitely want to make sure that we address that, right? There's a lot of confusion about, well, who is really the customer then? Right. And I'm not saying if you're doing program work, because if you're doing program work, you kind of already know like who your customer kind of is. It's the insurance carrier who's saying, hey, go off to, Susie Q's house and go ahead and we've got a project for you. Right. But in most cases, it's the end consumer. Like that's really who the customer is. Right.
That is your customer.
Right. But, if who's holding the purse strings, it's the carrier. right? It's the carrier. So yes,
And
your
you want to be
homeowner is
cautious.
the
You want to be cautious to not put who your real customer is between you and the person that's holding the purse string.
right,
Because what you've
right.
got to look at is the industry as a whole. I mean, what happens with claims 5 years from now as people start switching from composition shingle roofs in the U.S. to concrete tile, where it's just
Mhm,
not going to get damaged? What happens when they put in
mhm,
smart water valves so water mitigation losses go down significantly? You've got to change your line of work and not rely on these once and done claims that Mrs. Smith is
right.
going to have maybe once or twice in her life. You want her to
Mhm,
know who you are. You want her to be able to
right.
leverage her. You're going to start being a broker in some of those types of tools, and putting on concrete shingles and selling and maintaining smart water valves. But you've got to maintain that relationship with that consumer, because they are the ones that are going to give you the thumbs up. They're going to give you the consumer sat scores. They're going to be the ones that are going to provide that word of mouth.
Right.
Should TPAs start dwindling, et cetera. But and that is frankly the balance. That is the rub. How do you work between the policyholder and the insurer? When the insurer holds the purse strings, the policyholder is the one that wants to get the work done, and you're the one that just wants to get paid.
Right. And you mentioned something about like the leveraging of this aspect, right? Like having this understanding, and how this understanding now, if you're, astute, if you're, you have a good understanding of how the game is being played, that there's a way to leverage all of this knowledge, and how that could ultimately lead to hopefully a happier life as a restoration contractor. What exactly would that be? How do we put all of this historical knowledge and what's happening in today's day and age, and then say, okay, let's go ahead and how do we translate all of this into an estimate, into an invoice, into bringing all the interested parties together, so that way we have the most kumbaya style relationship we can.
Yeah, you're for someone coming into this industry who doesn't understand their costs, you're going to be relying on those providers. You're going to be living by that, and they're either going to put you through the meat grinder until you're done and cannot meet payroll, or you're going to have to make a change. And some of those that are very successful in the marketplace are the ones that have at some point in time said no and walked away from work and said it in a nice diplomatic way to say, I can substantiate to you why my costs are here and why you're willing to pay this. But if this is all you're willing to pay, I'm not going to be able to do the work, but give me a call when it doesn't work out. And I'm happy to come back and fix it for a fee.
Right.
I mean, I'll give you the roofing example is a great example because it's one of the easiest ones. When someone's, heaven forbid, their roof is damaged by a hailstorm, and the insurer comes out and says, well, we don't pay, we're going to pay to replace the shingles because that's what damaged. We're not going to pay for the felt or the flashings or the pipe jacks or the drip edges of that nature. And from a roofer's perspective, what insurers have got to understand is that a roof is not just the shingles. It is a system. It's a membrane that's like multiple parts to this system, and one only works. It's only as good as the weakest point within it. And I was giving some advice, with a roofer who said, how do I compete with that when the adjuster says we don't pay for those things? I said, I would write up a waiver of liability or waiver of guarantee that just says, I'm happy to replace the shingles on the home if that's what you want. Sign this waiver of guarantee that says I can't guarantee that roof, that it won't leak.
Right.
And that solved the
And
problem.
the insurance company typically doesn't sign that.
No, well, I mean, and I again, I'm not faulting them. It's a lot of times it's a lack of understanding.
Right.
And I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to increase the level of education within the industry. That's one of the things I'm trying to do within the marketplace today. But I think that's going to be the key is people have to understand, yeah, there are some players out there that are going to try and game the system, but in the end, it's a lot of people that are just trying to put food on the table and get their kids through college. And they believe in their heart of hearts, they are trying to improve the world and save the world one home at a time, right? My job is to get somebody back into their home and make them happy. That's what I do, and all I'm asking to do is be paid for my appropriate time.
Yeah, and I love that, right? The education approach, and something that I've spoken about quite a bit on the podcast is that it's one thing to go ahead and for you as a restorer to go out and to get the additional training, to learn how to dry out better, to even learn how to invoice better, whatever the case may be. But there is this whole other aspect of the regurgitation of this education to the desk adjuster at times, right? Because they may not have a background in construction. They weren't there with you. They don't understand the dynamics. They may not understand the labor market in your local area. They may not understand costs. There's a million things that they are just simply not familiar with, or looking at a name and a couple of numbers, a couple of line items, and then they're making a decision based on that. And I think to some degree, you kind of have to, again, playing devil's advocate, you almost do need to have as much of a human element, the same kind of human element that you would have with your homeowner, you kind of need to have with your desk adjuster. Because again, they've got people breathing down their necks as well. There's a lot of tensions in their back office. They're probably getting yelled at 55 times a day by 55 different contractors. And,
Sure.
your invoice is just part of the story. And to take that time out to kind of educate them on, hey, this is why this is, I think that there's not enough conversation about how far that genuinely can get you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the typical I agree with you, the typical desk adjuster today, and going back historically again to where that started, years ago when insurers first said, hey, we want to try and watch our expenses like everybody does, and move our adjusters in behind a desk. And guess what? You take people that are used to being out in the field, that are climbing up on roofs, and having the smell of sawdust and drywall dust in their nose. They don't want to sit behind a desk. So they had to shift that model and start handling just very small types of losses, and so on, things that they could pay out over the phone, or there's little question to them. And then that started growing as the advent of additional technology to help you with estimation, like object recognition and remote measurements, things of that nature, to where now you can literally adjust a loss with the homeowner using one of these things going through the home for the most part. You can do your re-inspects with this as well. But guess what, man? I mean, this is advice and counsel I give to insurers as well. Awesome to do that. But you know what? If you're not getting your adjusters out in front of policyholders at least a couple times a year, you can't substitute standing in front of someone who's just been devastated by a significant loss to their home and seeing the damage that it's done, seeing them sift through their personal property and trying to find, those pictures that they'll never be able to replace and things of that nature. Until you have them realize that human element, they're just going to be machine processing those things. And that's what we've got to shift. I think we've gone from the pendulum swing, where it was, 3 contractor bids to 1 adjuster, and everybody knew each other. We used to go on fishing trips together, all of those types of things, down to this other end where you're dealing with adjusters that are 250 miles away sitting at a desk. There's got to be some equilibrium that we start achieving. And I think it's going to be a balance between some of these these nice estimating tools, these nice audit tools like we talked about, not a big leap from auditing an estimate to creating an estimate from the beginning, letting the contractor do those things that they do best, repairing homes, and then supplementing that estimate when they find hidden damage and things of that nature. There's going to be some balance that happens between those things as we start moving forward. But right now, we can't just let it lie. We've got to have that continuing education.
Do you think that that's wishful thinking, or do you think that that's something that's legitimately on the horizon? And just as an example, like here in Florida, there is, at least what I feel, and a lot of contractors here in the South Florida area feel, there's a huge squeeze through new laws, legislation, changes that are happening with the insurance arena, obviously tons of money being spent on lobbying, and it's all what feels like, I'm not saying that it is, but it feels like it's squeeze the contractor, limit your overall liability, try to pay out as little as you possibly can, to this, utopia that you're talking about, right? Where people can have a little bit more of a common ground. Is that wishful thinking, or do you think that that's something that maybe we can perhaps, get to at some point?
Well, so number one, to answer your last question first, yes, I think we can get there at some point. How do we get from here to there, and how quickly can we get from here to there? Is the key. Florida is a great example, one of the toughest states to do business in. They've got great consumer advocacy groups in the government, but those things can lead to challenges in claim settlement practice. When you say you've got to get an estimate into somebody's hands, within X number of hours after damage occurs, and your typical language says when you're giving someone an initial check for an initial settlement, it says this is your final settlement. that you're going to get for this, even when they know that my roof isn't going to be repaired for 4 months. It's going to have a blue tarp on it, and it's not going to be repaired for 4 months, and costs are going to be different. The very fact that this says final settlement in front of me in black and white means, guess what? I got a lawyer up. And those are challenges that are going to happen. So yes, I think we can get there. Yes, I think it's via education. Yes, I think that there's going to be a confluence or convergence of some of this technology that insurers are going to start relying on these applications to write estimates for them. They're going to start relying on the homeowner sending a video or some pictures and have that write the estimate for them. And then they'll send that off to a contractor. So it's no longer you that's written that estimate. But these things are not going to, if I take a picture of your roof, I have no idea whether or not it's got 3 layers of shingles underneath it, or if it's got damage to the decking below it. I don't have no idea whether or not there's how much water damage might be behind that baseboard of that drywall. There has to be, as implied by that, a way for you to submit supplements for contingencies on that particular loss. So I think it'll start shifting back to the old way where you'll get an initial settlement. You'll be able to come in and amend that going.
How much of the education, we talk a lot about education, right? We talk about educating the desk adjuster from time to time. We talk about educating ourselves as restoration contractors. Very few people have a conversation about educating the end consumer, right? The person, the homeowner, the commercial building owner. How much of a role do you think a restoration contractor should take on when they onboard a client to the education process on what they're about to step into? And, obviously the homeowner's never going to become a restorer, but there's so many different little moving parts. And I think there's just this preconceived idea that, hey, I'm insured. This is going to be a walk in the park, right? But a lot of contractors really aren't taking the time, so I feel, to kind of take a step back and be like, hey, let me tell you about the peaks and valleys and what we should be stepping into. Do you feel that restorers should take more of that educational approach, even when it comes down to the homeowner?
Yep, absolutely. So we started coining some terms a couple of years ago, from high touch to low touch on a claim. And, you started to think, low touch was something that's, okay, I had my golf clubs stolen out of my garage. It's low touch. Of course, they were Titleist clubs, obviously. So you've got those types of things, and you've got the high touch, the fire loss, the water loss type of those things. And we literally got away from that because there are some, it's not the amount of touch, quote unquote, is not related necessarily to the size and complexity of loss. It's related also to the policyholder and what are their needs are. I mean, Florida is a great example. A lot of vacation homes, right? People aren't there, and it's a very affluent area. A lot of areas are very affluent. So you've got a claim, you're dealing with a policyholder that might be 650 miles away, and they just want you to take care of it. Dude, I don't need you to explain to me why it's doing this. Just please get in and take care of it, because I'm bringing my family down there in 3 weeks. And I want to have it right. So you've got that level. And so you get away from using high touch, low touch to just right touch. What's appropriate for this particular policyholder? And you can tell when you go out and meet with them, is someone interested, or the same way I would do with new construction or remodeling or restoration back in the day. It was all, you can tell from certain questions that are asked by them, do they really want to know? And you can prompt them. How much do you want to know? I'm here to educate you. You are my customer. I'm here for you. I want us to have a relationship. I want to be able to do work for you in future. Hopefully you never have another insurance claim, but if you have other things that happen, I want you to be able to call me.
Yeah.
How much
I want
do
to
you want
talk
to know?
your love language, right? I want to talk your love
That's
language.
exactly
like,
right.
What is it?
And you've got to be able to do that. You've got to be able to do, which means you've got to have people that can do it.
Yep, I love that. So one of the things that I had asked you before is 3 keys to success in business and or life. What would you say those 3 keys are? Success
in business. So I go back to this one because I'm a repair cost guy as well as an estimate. Know what your costs are, know what your competitors are charging. And again, I don't care if you're selling hamburgers. If you're selling hamburgers, you ought to know what that slice of tomato is going to cost you. You ought to know what a leaf of lettuce is going to.
Yep.
And if you're in the restoration business, you need to know if you're doing drywall in-house, awesome. You ought to know what your costs are, and not just costs of direct material and labor. The guys I'm paying to go out and hang the finish drywall, but my other costs for licensure and marketing and rental on my properties, my cost for cell phone service, all of that's got to be built in. And there are calculators that will help you do these things, but understand that. And then understand, number one, understand what your competitors are charging. You're going to be competing in a market. And especially as you get into the place and, as perhaps, I don't know that this is the case, but as as direct repair and managed repair may go down, and as the number of claims go down, how do you boost your business? How do you start becoming a broker in some of these other services? You got to have that relationship with the policyholder, which means you're going to be competing on price again. You're going to be competing on service again, more so than you're doing now. So understand what your competitors are charging. And if they're charging more from you, more than you are, awesome. That's easy to adjust. If they're charging less than you, why is that? Are there things that you need to be doing from an efficiency perspective in your organization to adjust costs? And I'm not talking about cutting corners, but are you deploying people in the wrong way? Are you using older trucks that have 180,000 miles on them? Costs are very high, things of that. You have to know those two key things. And the other thing is you've got to inspire your people with regard to why they're in this business. And there's a great book that we read as an organization that just said the title was Start with Why. And this is how you motivate your people. Why are you in business? Are you in business to make money? Are you in business to serve customers? And if you're in business for the latter, to serve customers, then the money will automatically happen. I mean, that's just a given. But you've got to be able to, as a leader, inspire your people to do work. They have to believe in what you're doing. And the younger generation, they want to save the world, like I said, which is great. I did, obviously, when I was young, till I realized that saving it is a little bit tougher. But I mean, that's really what we're trying to do in this particular industry, right? I mean, we're saving the world one home at a time. All you can do is take these people that have experienced a tragic loss, hopefully not a devastating loss, the loss of a loved one or something like that. And how can you work with them to make their lives again? Right. And if people get that, they get the level of customer service that needs to happen. You need, like, your project managers, every one of them ought to have a shop vac in the back of their truck or they ought to be able to answer any question. They ought to be able to clean up or mitigate any mess that was left over by their people at the end of the day. And just those little things that you've got to be able to do. And that's key. That's key again with any business. So understanding your costs, understanding what your competitors are charging, and then just making sure that your people understand why you're in business so that you can motivate them to provide the level of customer service that Rico would be providing or Mike would be providing if it was us that were going out.
And this is an interesting hot topic, right? We're talking about labor force now. When it comes down to the labor force, and something that I consistently go back to on the podcast is it's difficult to compete today with what is visually and what's being dumped into the younger workforce's mind. And by the way, full disclosure, I fully understand it. I fully understand it because I'm a marketing guy. I enjoy marketing, and I like waking up in the morning and seeing several sales that come in that I did nothing for other than provide a couple of links or whatever the case may be, right? We're talking about like this digital laptop lifestyle. So when the young workforce is being fed this new narrative of like, hey, why roll up your sleeves and get dirty? Right? Why work for $25 an hour, $30 an hour, right? And then you've got restoration. The entirety of the restoration business is really a people business, right? We can't do it without the right smiling faces that are willing to go in and help put somebody's life back together again. Sometimes it's very, very difficult, right? How does one, as a business owner, as a leader, how does one say, hey, look, all of this shiny stuff is great, but this is also extremely rewarding work, and then develop a culture around that? Do you feel that less people are receptive to the traditional work that used to take place back in the day and that are looking for alternatives? And maybe perhaps that's what's, causing the restoration industry to be struggling as far as labor is concerned?
Yeah, I think that's certainly one of the challenges. And you have this in the technology space as well. You've got people that start off at some of the entry-level jobs where they might be making $20, $25 an hour. They don't want to do that for the rest of their lives. Very few do that. They want to be able to move up. I think within the restoration industry, you're going to have ideally a younger workforce that has the backs to be able to go out and do the work, right? That are not opposed to working, and you pay them a premium, obviously, for weekend and 24-hour level service, and offer them education benefits, offer them benefits in addition to what you're paying them, offer them some benefits to further themselves if they want to stay within that industry and grow within that industry, and potentially grow into a project management role or an estimator role or even a senior level management role. If you want to grow as an organization and open up an office in another city, that there are people that you could recognize to do that. Or if they want to do something else completely, support that, because you're going to gradually have turnover throughout your organization of these folks that are coming and going within the industry. You mentioned a key point. How do you motivate people to really understand that there is a key benefit to doing this. And sometimes, and this is the chicken and the egg, right? Until somebody gets out and actually starts doing some of that work and knowing that, hey, what I've just done, this is what was so great for me back when I was a carpenter and remodeling homes, is I could build a thing and I knew it was going to be there for years for people to enjoy. And when you're in the technology space, the office space, and you're shuffling things from the inbox to the outbox, you don't get that kind of gratification.
Right.
And people have to understand that that's a benefit. And maybe one of the things is you start attending some community service type things and going out with people and start just chatting it up. But there are still a group of young folks that like to work with their hands. And some of that is just born into them, and a lot of it is nurtured into them from their parents. I mean, when my son was a kid and he started driving, even before that, I'd say, it's time to change the oil, climb under there, tell me what you need, and have him do it. And he complained until, a couple of years ago, he came to me and he said, you know what? I came to realize none of my friends even know how to work a cordless screwdriver. So thanks, Dad. And it came time to change a tire. They had no clue. My grandfather, who, lived through the Depression, always told me, if you can work with your hands, you'll never go hungry. And apart from that, you've got the satisfaction of knowing what you've done is going to be there for a long time. So I think that's the crux, is the chicken and the egg. How do you start encouraging people? And I think that's a level of education as well, but you've got to get out into the schools in an early way. And that's beyond the scope of I shouldn't say beyond, but that's another level of the scope of what we need to do as an industry so that we can carry it on.
Right. I love that. One of the things that I usually like to talk to my guest about is books. Obviously, I love reading, and I love showing people or exposing them to new books and new ideas. What are your top 3 books? You mentioned one, which is Start With Why. What are your other top 2 favorite books that were the 2 books that you would recommend for entrepreneurs that is an absolute must read in your opinion, and why?
So granted, some of these are more related to larger organizations of which I was a part. It's a little bit different if you are, smaller restoration, smaller mom and pop, or smaller restoration. Start With Why, I think, is great because that's something that is applicable to any size of organization. You got to inspire your people so that they can inspire. Jim Collins wrote a good set of books that was Good to Great. How do you go from a good company to a great company? Clayton, there was some other books relative to, The Innovator's Dilemma, I guess, is another one that I challenged within our particular industry that I thought was good. Clayton Christensen, he's the guy that wrote it, since passed now, rest him, but a great book there. So Jim Collins, Good to Great. There was a great book called Managing Across Cultures that I think is helpful. It used to be helpful if you were just looking to expand internationally, because you're dealing with people that have grown up in different cultures. But as we have more of an influx of immigration, and you're dealing with people that come in from different cultures, managing across cultures is critical. And one of the key things that book really explains is you have to understand the difference between the typical Western, meaning the US culture. Let's say that you and I first meet on the street and we're talking about business. Our tendency, because of the culture in which we grew up, I'm going to trust you until you prove to me that I can't trust you. And a lot of the European cultures are just the opposite. I'm not going to trust you until you prove to me that I can. Mm-hmm. And you have to understand that as you're starting to manage across. So managing across cultures was a good one. Good to Great, Start With Why. The other one that I read that I thought was really good, but this is more larger relational stuff, was called The Advantage. And that was just how to organize your teams and the purpose of having different management teams. And as any organization grows, you're going to have teams of managers that are managing people that are going to report up to a management team and so on. And the key within that particular book was to convey to managers. So if you got first level managers, right, that are reporting to second level managers and other, as a manager, you are not only the manager of a team, but you are the member of a management team. And if there's ever a question about a conflict between the two, the one that's always right is the member of the management team. You've got to follow, those things flow downwards, and you've got to be able to convey that culture across the team. So those, I think, were key books for me that I read over the years, a lot of different ones, but those were good.
That's amazing. And by the way, like someone might be listening who doesn't have a large organization. It's like, well, maybe I'll skip out on that one. But I think that there's a tremendous amount of value while any company is in its infancy to at least start getting those little nuggets of information of what a bigger establishment looks like. Because again, at least you know how to build, because there's if you're going to grow, there's going to be steps along the way. And if you kind of have an idea of what the landscape is going to look like, you're already winning. So it's better to read it now as opposed to like read it later once you already have a disorganized business model.
Well, and learning how to grow your business. There's two things that'll kill a business. One is not enough business, and the other is too much business.
Yep.
Right. So how do you grow? How do you grow in a controlled manner? And if you're taking care of your customers and see in the future, you should always, any business leader should spend, it varies on the amount of time that you should spend per day, but you ought to plan on spending a half an hour of your day thinking about, where does my company need to be 12 months, 24 months, 36 months from now? And how do I get it there? And not just focusing on today, focus on tomorrow.
I love it, Mike. Well, thank you so much, brother, for jumping on the show today. I appreciate having you on and sharing your knowledge. If someone wants to get in contact with you, follow up with you and your ideas and everything else, where can they find you on the interwebs?
So I again, independent advocate, have not started up my own website or anything like that yet. But they can certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn, Mike Fulton, CPCU, prior with the Verisk organization. A lot of people have connected with me there. They can reach out to me in that way. Probably the best way to get started.
Awesome. And all Dominators out there, there is going to be a link in the video description as well as in the show notes below that will go ahead and lead you over to Mike's Instagram page, his LinkedIn page. I mean, hey, maybe eventually you'll be on Instagram, but for right now, LinkedIn page. And Mike, man, thank you again so much for tuning in. Dominators, make sure that you check out the link, reach out to Mike if you have any questions. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Meanwhile, hustle, hack, dominate. Always talk to you guys on the next one.
You've been listening to Restoration Domination, your #1 resource for tips, tricks, and hacks to help your business grow. Subscribe to our channel and follow us for more Restoration Domination. And follow our host at Rico Garcia Jr. on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Till next time, this is Restoration Domination. Hustle, hack, dominate.